This is the second video for lesson 11.4, congruent triangles and proofs. Okay, the second example we're going to do, we are given that AB is congruent to CD, and that is marked in my picture. And angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and that's also marked in my picture. We're going to prove, I'm going to just put this in gray because I don't know it yet. I'm going to prove that this piece is congruent to this piece. So if I think of a strategy, so pretend like if none of that was there, if I'm thinking of a strategy, if I'm trying to prove these two things, if I look, well, I can see like this triangle like looks like it might be congruent, and that's not enough to prove it, but that gives me an idea. What if I could prove that those two triangles were congruent? If I could prove that those two triangles were congruent, then every part that matched up, every corresponding part would be congruent. So then AD and BC would be equal. So my first job then is to prove that these two triangles are congruent. So what do I have? I have a side and I have an angle. So I either need another angle or I need a side, but it can't be AD and BC because I don't have any idea that they're congruent. So what do I know? So let's go back to the proof. I've got some givens. So I've got two places to put givens. So that's convenient because I have two givens. Okay. Now the next thing it says AC is congruent to AC. Look at the picture. AC is congruent to itself. Okay, what's that reason? Can you remember what that is? Okay, if you thought reflexive property, that's correct. Now look at my picture. What I've got is I've got a side, I've got an angle, and I've got a side, and that angle is included. So I'm ready to say side, angle, side gives me two triangles are congruent. So let's make a triangle statement. Triangle ABC is congruent to, and that's this triangle, ABC, is congruent to, now make sure you state it correctly. So A is this angle that has this mark right there, so it's going to be C. So triangle C, and then I go to B, this one out here, so it's going to be D, and then A. So notice that the A's don't match up with each other. Neither do the C's. So that's, the way it goes because of the orientation of the triangles. Okay, now I've got two triangles that are congruent. So I've got this one is the same as this one. And so because of that, if I wanted to, I could prove that this angle was congruent to this one because they correspond with each other. I could prove that this angle was congruent to this angle because they correspond with each other. And I can also prove then that this side is congruent with that side because they correspond with each other. So I can say that AD is congruent to CB because they correspond with each other, and corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So I have done that. Okay, note number 3. Again, this is one of the ones where you fill in the blanks. So I'm going to give you all the statements and reasons and everything, and you're going to figure out where they go in the proof. So the first thing we want to do is look at what we're given and mark up our picture. So it says angle J is congruent to angle N. So I'm going to mark that. KM bisects JN. So that means KM is like, think of a vector like coming through, and it's going to cut this one in half. So we have to be really careful about how we're looking at this. JN is what's being cut in half. KL, I don't know that. I don't know that. KM is the one cutting in half. It didn't say it's being cut in half. And then JK is 6. Do not write that this is 6. You do not know that. We don't have any way to prove that. It was not given. It says we need to prove that it's 6. And so how do I get there? Given the information I have, how do I get there? All right, so taking a look at our proof. Starting out with our givens, it says angle J is congruent to angle N, KM bisects JN, so obviously that's going to be given. And so I can cross off one of my givens there. Then it's got a place for one more given, and so that's going to be JK is equal to 6 because that's the only other given. Now the next thing we've got that JL is congruent to NL. So look back at your picture. JL, that's this one, is congruent to NL. Why? Why are those congruent? Look at your options you have. Which one of those would fit for an option? And remember, it says not all will be used. So what's going to fit? Why were those two congruent to each other? Well, I was told that KM bisects JN. And so a segment bisector, that's what that is. Definition of a segment bisector. So definition, segment bisector. Okay. Now the next, number 5, the reason says vertical angles have equal measures. Look up in your picture, where are vertical angles? Do you see vertical angles? Not right there. It's going to be these two right there. Those are vertical angles, and they must be congruent because vertical angles have equal measures. So which of these statements that I have here says something about those two angles? This one says something about angles. JLK, that's that one. NLM, that's that one. That's what I want. So I'm going to say angle JLK is congruent to angle NLM because vertical angles have equal measures. Cross it off. Okay, now the next thing says that triangle JLK is congruent to triangle NLM. So the only thing that could go here is one of our 5 statements. I could do side, 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 angle, 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 side, or hypotenuse leg. Obviously, hypotenuse leg is out because it's not a right triangle. The other ones, I just need to see which one I have. Now, you notice I have a couple of options up there, but they're not all going to be right. Like, you have to decide, is it going to be that one or that one? Like, which one is it? So looking what our choices are, I've got an angle, I've got a side and an angle. I've got an angle, side, angle. So it's going to be angle, side, angle. That's the one. So angle, side, angle. Okay, so now that I've proven the triangles are congruent, what do I have to do? So coming back and looking at what I'm trying to do again, I just proved that this triangle was congruent to this triangle. And I'm trying to prove that NM is 6. So I can't just say that this is 6 because I have a little step to get through first. I am going to cross out real quickly in my reasons here SAS and AAS because I'm not going to be using those. I've already used my angle, side, angle. That's the one. The other two were just there to distract you, okay? All right, now looking at what I have left, I have a Cpctc, and that means that if I've proven 2 triangles are congruent, which I have, then that means their corresponding parts are also congruent. That seems like that's useful. And then I've got JK is congruent to NM. That's also what I'm trying to do, but it's not exactly it's not my end result. And so anyway, and then I've got the JK is equal to 6. Well, JK equals 6. Oh, I think I just forgot to cross that out earlier. Yeah, that's already crossed out. Okay, so let's come back down here. And I'm trying to get to NM is equal to 6. So let's say that JK is congruent to NM. And the reason is because Cpctc, they're corresponding parts of congruent triangles. And so, because they're corresponding parts of congruent triangles, then that means that back here when I said that JK was equal to 6, and now I've said that it's the same as NM, then that means that NM is equal to 6, and that's because corresponding parts have equal measures. And if I look back up here, that's what I've got. Did that. Okay, and that's my proof. So I set out to prove that those 2 pieces were congruent. I ended up doing that. Have to prove the triangle's congruent first, though. Okay, number 4. Given BC is congruent to DC, so you see how that's marked, and angle A is congruent to angle E. So what I want you to do is I want you to pause this video right now, and I want you to go through and I want you to do this proof. It's not very long. Okay, look at what you're trying to prove. Look at the clues that I've given you. And I want you to come back when you have this done and see how you did. Okay, here's the completed proof. So if you want to pause and compare what you have. You had to find the vertical angles. So those are the vertical angles. You cannot just call them angle C. So if you call them angle C is congruent to angle C, that's not right. You need to actually name it out because there's more than one angle C there, so you can't just say angle C. The reason the 2 triangles are congruent is angle, angle, side. And then because the 2 triangles are congruent, then you can say that their corresponding parts are congruent. So because they're congruent, I can say that this piece is congruent to this piece because they would match up. Okay, number 5. Using the triangles below, right down here, we are going to prove that AJ, this one, is equal to 10. So if you look at that, you can kind of in your mind see like, okay, I think I'm going to prove the 2 triangles are congruent, and then since they're congruent, they're going to be the same measures, that kind of thing. So if I look at my options, hopefully you can be able to get to the point where you're about ready to do this. So I'm going to have you again pause the video, and I don't want you to come back until you've got this done. And so you can find out if you made any mistakes and how you're doing and what you need to work on. So come back when you have it finished. Okay, for the givens, I just used what was marked on the picture. So I crossed all those off in gray. So it was the angles, it was the sides, and then this one side right there. I was then able to prove that the triangles were congruent by angle, side, angle, angle, side, angle. And then the next thing was Cpctc. So what two sides am I interested in showing are the same? So I'm going to say that AJ and DM, that's what I was interested in. So AJ is congruent to DM, and that's because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Keep in mind that congruence is what we're talking about. It has to be a congruence statement. You can't say like equals. So congruence. And then because they're congruent, then you can say that AJ is equal to 10 because corresponding parts have equal measures, congruent parts have equal measures. Congruent parts have equal measures. Okay, and once I said that, I just realized I said something wrong on a previous problem. So if I go back to this one, number 3, right down here in the last step, I said corresponding parts, and this should be congruent parts. So sorry about that. Okay, you should now be ready to complete lesson 11.4. You should be able to fill in a proof by yourself. You should be able to use all of the triangle congruence tests and know when and how to use Cpctc. You need to know about vertical angles. You need to know about reflexive property. You need to know the difference between saying two segments are congruent and the measures of segments are equal. And so you want to make sure that you've practiced that up so that you're ready for the test.